Welcome back, everyone. If you're fascinated by the invisible forces that actually power our modern world, well, you're exactly where you need to be. Today's explainer is a deep dive into an urgent, massive shift happening right now across the Atlantic. Europe is basically scrambling to completely rewrite its critical supply chains, and honestly, the stakes could not be higher. We're talking about the foundation of literally every smart device, electric vehicle, and piece of advanced technology we use every single day. So get comfortable and let's unravel exactly how the European Union plans to untangle itself from one of the most complex geopolitical webs in modern history. Okay, let's kick things off with a number that should immediately grab your attention. Greater than 90%. That massive figure represents Europe's staggering reliance on one single nation, China, for its rare earth supplies. Now just think about that for a second. Rare earths are the absolutely crucial ingredients for the digital and green transitions. If a single point of failure controls over 90% of the vital materials your entire tech sector relies on, you don't just have a supply chain problem, you have an existential economic vulnerability. And this isn't just some hypothetical risk we're throwing around. It's a very real, very present danger that currently has European lawmakers working overtime.
Because, that theoretical vulnerability has rapidly turned into factory floor reality. Just look at the supply chain shocks we've seen recently. Beijing imposed export controls on rare earth magnets right in the middle of a tariff dispute with the United States. Then we saw halted shipments from Chinese-owned Nexperia after the Dutch government actually stepped in to seize control of the company. And these aren't just isolated incidents happening in a vacuum. The direct impacts fell hard on European car makers, hitting one of the bloc's most vital economic engines. These painful disruptions have really exposed Europe's vulnerabilities and forced this stark realization that the status quo, it's just completely broken.
Section 1. The Diversification Instrument Explained.
So, to fix this, EU Trade Commissioner Maros Šefčovič is championing a brand new strategy called the Diversification Instrument. It's essentially a proposed legal tool designed to literally force companies operating in sensitive, high-risk sectors to source their materials from at least 3 different suppliers. That's the crucial point here, this strict rule of 3. It's a pretty aggressive market intervention. The government would be stepping in to mandate that a company can no longer just find the cheapest single source for a vital component and call it a day. They absolutely have to diversify. They must build redundancies into their supply network by law, fundamentally mitigating the risk of a single supplier just cutting them off.
To really get to the heart of the motivation here, listen to this direct quote from Šefčovič himself. He laid this out at the European Policy Center's Brussels Economic Security Forum. He said, "If it's critical supplies, you have to have 3 different suppliers to make sure that you cannot be punished because of a political reason." That phrasing right there, punished because of a political reason, it gives this policy a very human, very stark voice. It strips away all the bureaucratic jargon and highlights the raw reality driving the legislation. Trade is no longer just about economics. It is heavily weaponized by geopolitics, and Europe is desperately trying to build a legal shield against that reality. Section 2. Learning from past crises. To truly understand the mechanics of this brand new strategy, we actually just need to look at Europe's own playbook. Back in 2014, right after the annexation of Crimea, Europe suddenly realized its dangerous dependency on Russian energy. The solution spearheaded back then, which, by the way, was also championed by Šefčovič, was the Energy Union. It was this massive coordinated effort to wean the entire continent off a single high-risk energy supplier. Fast forward to 2026, and we're seeing the exact same architecture being applied to a totally new crisis. The diversification instrument is basically the tech equivalent of the Energy Union. The target has just shifted from Russian oil and gas to Chinese chips and rare earths. The underlying philosophy, that single supplier dependence is just an unacceptable security threat, remains exactly the same. Section 3. The Broader Independent Strategy. Now, this diversification instrument doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It's part of a total ecosystem overhaul. To really anchor the financial stakes of why this is happening right now, consider this monumental number, 360 billion euros. That was the trade deficit Europe ran with China last year. And honestly, it's not just the sheer mind-boggling size of the number that's alarming policymakers, it's the trajectory. That deficit jumped 18% from 2024. EU leaders, Šefčovič included, have openly called this deficit completely unsustainable. So when European leaders meet to discuss industrial overcapacity and subsidized exports, this 360 billion euro gap, it's the massive elephant in the room. It's the economic bleeding that these new trade tools are desperately trying to tourniquet.
Of course, to combat that deficit and that dependency, Europe is also focusing heavily on domestic production. The diversification instrument is really just one piece of a much larger legislative puzzle. We also have the EU Chips Act, and the stated goal here is highly ambitious. They want to double Europe's share of global chip production to 20%. But the Commission isn't even stopping there. They've already proposed a Chips Act 2.0 in June 2026 to introduce even more measures to cut strategic dependencies. The logic is pretty straightforward. If you can't rely on a single foreign supplier and finding 3 external suppliers is difficult, the safest bet by far is to dramatically increase your capacity to build these critical technologies right at home. But, and this is a massive but, we really have to face reality here. You can write a law in a few months, sure, but shifting a physical, global supply chain, that takes serious time. Right now, in the present, the EU is joining forces with Washington to desperately find alternative sources. In the short term, they're busy drafting the formal legal proposals for the diversification instrument. But consider this. While Sweden recently discovered Europe's largest rare earth deposit, which is a huge glimmer of long-term hope, the timeline to actually mine those materials stretches well beyond a decade. So, for the next 10+ years, Europe remains heavily exposed, just trying to bridge the gap between their ambitious legal mandates and the hard physical reality of global mining and manufacturing. Which leaves us with this final, absolutely crucial question. Can Europe actually legislate its way to supply chain independence before the next global disruption hits? The rule of 3 suppliers is a bold, protective concept for sure, and the push for domestic chip manufacturing is historic in its scale. But with mining timelines stretching over a decade and geopolitical tensions literally shifting by the minute, this is a very real race against the clock. Will these legal tools act as a sufficient shield, or will the physical realities of tech logistics just outpace the law? That is the billion-dollar question we'll be watching closely. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the supply chains around you, and I'll see you next time.